Who are some of the most despicable scammers you'd never want to meet? Let's start with number 6, another fake guru. Mariam Mbula scammed tons of people through a decade-long criminal career. But instead of owning up to her criminal past and present, she painted herself as a victim of circumstances. She was so successful in doing this that she was once invited to a TV show to speak about her life and inspire other women. On the show, Mbula claimed that her involvement in crime was due to being in a bad relationship and running with the wrong group. She also said that she went to prison and was forced to have her child while she was in the slammer. But her stories are only shades of the truth, not the truth in full color. Like some 80s action hero, Mariam found herself in Spanish prison. Well, a Spanish prison, like a prison in Spain, not a prison for Spaniards, where she befriended the mother of a woman named Ellie. Mariam took care of the woman and became very useful as a translator. Mariam claimed that she would be able to get the woman a bail hearing, but to do this, she'd need some personal information. The information included things like her children's names, their ages, and any other detail the woman could produce. Mariam claimed all of this was just to get the right bail hearing. Most bail judges, especially Spanish bail judges, like hearing personal details about kids they've never met. It softens their hearts. So it makes sense that Mariam would need to know about her kids and grandkids for a bail hearing. Seriously, wasn't the woman like, "Why are you asking me about my kids for this?" A while later, the woman's daughter, Ellie, got a call from someone named Charlene claiming to be an embassy official. Charlene claimed that her mother would be granted a bail hearing for a fee of £10,000. The official knew everything there was to know about her, so Ellie paid the money. The official called again and this time asked for £5,600 more. Again, Ellie gave them money. However, Ellie noticed something was wrong when a text from Charlene had the Apple ID Mariam Dynasty. Ellie asked who Mariam Dynasty was, and Charlene stopped replying. Ellie knew she'd been scammed. The incident was so financially catastrophic that Ellie and her family, including a child with Down syndrome, were evicted as a result. A year after that incident, Mariam continued her schemes by meeting another woman and convincing her that she worked for Nike. Mariam then convinced the woman that she could make her daughter the face of the sportswear brand. Every parent thinks their kid's the best looking, so it's reasonable that the woman bought it. So the woman paid £11,400 for an opportunity that never existed. Mariam, adding insult to injury, scammed the woman again by selling her luxury items that were never delivered. The victim paid £18,214 for dresses she never got because Mariam never had them either. And still, Mariam was able to use her status as a single mother to sell another sob story. When she came on TV to talk about her experiences, Mariam said that what she went through inspired her to create Mentor Matcher. Mentor Matcher was a program that matched disadvantaged young women with mentors who would guide them to the right path. Women who would like to learn from the Mentor Matcher program were supposed to pay a ticket fee of $200 just to listen to Mariam speak. So, a lot like college. Am I right? However, Mariam's claims that she was only a victim of circumstances didn't hold up to scrutiny. Because she was arrested and put in prison, Mariam had committed a slew of credit card frauds. At the time this video drops, she had built an incredible criminal career riddled with 13 convictions for 34 offenses. This includes 27 charges for fraud and dishonesty, and she has been jailed in the UK, Belgium, and Spain. Mariam has become so infamous that she now has an informal group of victims going after her. One of her victims, Tamara Gao, created a Twitter account and started asking for people who had been scammed by Mariam to step forward, and they did. One of the women who came forward was Mariam's college friend, Chimina. Chimina said that Mariam was always the friendly type in college, and a while after graduation, they got in contact through Facebook. Very soon, Mariam became a close friend, and Chimina started telling her about the trouble she had. One day, Chimina made the mistake telling her about her grandmother who just had a few months to live. Chimina and her mother were flying back to Jamaica to see her and were in the process of getting tickets. Mariam told her that she could get discounted tickets for her through her company and that Chimina should send over the ticket money to purchase the tickets at a discount. Unfortunately, Chimina trusted her friend and sent the money. Yep, it turned out to be a scam because Mariam didn't didn't send any tickets over and stopped picking up Chimina's calls. It's hard to believe Mariam could even find the time to scam an old college friend who's trying to visit a terminally ill relative. What with all the clubbing of baby seals she's probably been doing. But Mariam didn't just scam in prison and outside. She also took her trade to church. After leaving prison, she joined SPAC Nation Church, congregation based in South London, where she became senior pastor. This is a church we've covered in the past. At the church, she began relating with young churchgoers and made her home a safe space for them. But before long, she began asking her congregation for money. According to one of her victims, Sarah, Mariam's entire shtick was to find young people with good credit ratings and get them to borrow money to loan her. This created a situation where young people around her suffered with repaying the loans while Mariam hardly bothered about them. Somehow, Mariam has yet to be arrested for any of these crimes. She's still at large, and an investigation into her conduct is ongoing. And Ellie, the evicted woman with the Down syndrome's kid, seriously, who evicts a family like hers? I don't care that you were just scammed and your child has special needs. Get out on the street where you belong. They were probably better off without a landlord like that anyway. Number 5. Serial squatting. Heather Ann Schwab has been sentenced to prison for repeated housing scams that left homeowners in debt. The prolific scammer and her husband, Mr. Heather Ann Schwab, have been evicted from their rented homes more than 20 times. The modus operandi of the couple's fraud is exactly what you'd expect it to be. They would use phony names to escape background checks while filing paperwork to move into their new homes. Then the Schwabs would refuse to pay rent, forcing the homeowners to go through the tedious process of evicting them legally. Once they were evicted, the couple would go and start the scam with another home. According to one former landlord, Heather and her husband always gave excuses when asking about their payments. It was usually something or the other. When they eventually got evicted, which was 5 months after moving in, the landlord discovered that they had trashed the entire house. The couple became so notorious for their scamming that they eventually had to switch states and start all over. And once they moved, they began their fraud once more. The Schwabs were eventually arrested and made to face the law. Heather was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and her husband will also be sentenced in the future. The good thing is that they won't need to pay rent in prison. It's free. And while the scam makes sense on paper, yeah, just move in and wait until you're forced out 4 to 5 months later. Sure, free rent, but who wants to move that much? And they'd been evicted over 20 times. We pay high rent just so we don't have to move once every 5 years. Those two are crazy. Number 4, magical scammers. A couple of fake magicians, as opposed to actual magicians such as Criss Angel. Is that guy still around? Anyway, they fleeced an unsuspecting man of 1,700 pounds after performing a magic trick. Their victim was cognitively impaired, so he was an easy target for the fake Criss Angels to finally fool someone and make money. The first of the tricksters approached the man and told him that he had good fortune. Afterwards, the man performed a magic trick for him and asked for payment for the trick. The second magician then approached the victim and performed the same trick, illusion, and then demanded he withdraw cash from the ATM for payment. In total, the victim withdrew 1,700 pounds to pay the two fraudsters. The scammers are still on the run, and the police are looking for information that could lead to their arrest. And performing the same trick twice in a row? That has to be against some rule somewhere in the Magic Castle. And for our money, David Blaine's the closest to Houdini we're ever going to get, and is far superior to Criss Angel. Shout out in the comments if you agree. Number 3, the good old faking an illness scam. Wendy Jane Lentini scammed the government thousands of dollars after claiming to have multiple sclerosis. The funny thing about this is that Lentini is currently serving a jail term for insurance fraud, so she isn't new to this at all. Lentini had been sentenced to a 5-year jail term back in 2018 when she was found guilty of scamming the Commonwealth Bank's ComInsure. To commit the Commonwealth Bank fraud, Lentini claimed she had multiple sclerosis. This allowed her to receive a massive payout from the bank. When quizzed about the crime, she claimed that she committed it because her husband was physically abusing her and she was suffering from battered wife syndrome. She was only discovered after her husband sent a letter to law enforcement a decade after the crime was committed. The police discovered that around that period, Jane also committed disability check fraud on the basis of a multiple sclerosis diagnosis that she never had. To commit the fraud, she enlisted the help of a woman who actually had the disease and used her paperwork to file for the disability checks. When the scam was discovered, prosecutors decided to ask for extra time to be added to Jane's current sentence. Jane's attorney, on the other hand, claimed that his client had already served time and was sorry for offending. The judge, hearing her case, said that Jane might be sorry, but she never came clean about her crime. In fairness, though, why would she? Did the judge expect her to randomly come forward while she was already serving her sentence for a similar crime? Lentini was still awaiting sentencing at the time of this video. Number 2, choose Ponzi. Derek Chu was accused of running a Ponzi scheme and defrauding people of over $39 million. Chu used several companies to raise millions of dollars from unsuspecting victims. The victims were told that their money would be used for investments that would guarantee them fantastic returns. Chu said that their money would go into purchasing and reselling basketball tickets. They were also told that they would invest in luxury suites around the country, but none of that was ever done. Chu simply took the money he was given and spent it on luxury cars, expensive jewelry, and travel. For the luxury suit scam, Chu would take his victims to the Chase Center in San Francisco. Then he would tell them they would earn a 50% interest if they invested in a suite for $440,000. Instead of purchasing the suite, he used the new money to pay previous investors, just like a regular Ponzi scheme. Derek Chu used a part of the largesse from his fraud to indulge in his love for collecting luxury cars. He bought 12 expensive Lexuses and some Porsches, according to a complaint against him. He also bought a house from the proceeds of his fraudulent business. The house was in an affluent area, and he made sure to use it to convince more unsuspecting people to lend him money. One of the victims who believed in him was a man named Jonathan Mayedes. Mayedes believed that Chu was a successful businessman as a result of his lavish spending and decided to loan him money through promissory notes. In total, Mayedes loaned Chu over $750,000. Most of the money is yet to be returned. The insane thing about this entire gig is that it isn't the first time Chu would be accused of fraudulent behavior. In fact, he had previously been caught up in a fraud case with his father, Felix Chu. Felix was accused of running an elaborate scam that targeted elderly investors and swindled them out of their life savings. According to the complaint, Felix and his son, Derek, issued promissory notes to their victims and paid out the interest on the investments for a while before stopping. Derek has now been arrested and charged with wire fraud and money laundering. He's been ordered to pay back Mayedes what's owed and currently faces 20 years in prison if convicted of wire fraud. He also faces up to 10 years in prison for money laundering. We wish Derek had chosen a different path. Be sure to stay tuned for our past release on more families who love to do scams together. Number 1. The Church-Going Ponzi. Ephraim Taylor defrauded members of several churches of over $14 million by promising them extraordinary returns through ethical investments. The basics of the scam were simple. Taylor sold an image of a young Christian black man who made money through smart and ethical investments. Soon, Taylor started touring churches and speaking to congregations about ethical investment practices. In his messages to congregations, he made sure to invoke Jesus, quote, Bible passages, and generally sell a fantastic and overblown image of himself and his business. For example, Taylor said he made his first million and founded 2 tech companies before leaving high school. He called himself the youngest black millionaire and CEO in the country. When asked about his net worth, he claimed that it was $20 million on a bad day. But his fraud didn't kick off till he went on what he called the Wealth Tour. This tour was a tour of popular churches where he was invited to speak about wealth creation and socially conscious investment opportunities. Taylor was invited to these churches to speak about how to make money ethically, but he instead went there to toot his horn and convinced members of the church to give him their money to invest. On the tour, he told members of the congregation to fire their brokers because they weren't investing wealth ethically and were inefficient. He said that he had a low-risk and high-reward model that guaranteed steady returns through socially conscious investment vehicles. Of course, these were all lies. The churchgoers who listened to Taylor were lulled into believing him because he seemed like a good Christian. Taylor preached the gospel, was rich, and had the approval of their pastors to speak to them. These Christians also believed that ostentatious living in preachers of the word is a sign of God's grace, not a red flag that they should run from. So obviously, everything checked out. They must have forgotten Jesus' opinions on personal wealth. When he started speaking with individuals who wanted to invest their savings with him, Taylor said he could guarantee a 20% return on investments. He also told them that they could invest in sweepstakes machines that guaranteed a 300% return on investments. He claimed that 20% of the returns will be given to charity as well. But that was all a lie. The machines and investment vehicles he spoke about literally did not exist. Instead of using investor funds as they wanted, Taylor used the money to fund his wife's music career, pay rent, settle business expenses, and in a few cases, pay previous investors. It was a proper Ponzi scheme. One of his biggest victims was Gary and Anita Dorio, a couple who attended Lakewood Church, owned by the popular evangelist Joel Osteen. When Taylor went to the Lakewood Church, he was allowed to speak about finances to a small group. But before he was introduced, a staff member reminded the group that Taylor wasn't endorsed by the church. Unfortunately, the Dorios believed Taylor's pitch, and they turned over $1.2 million to him to invest. Soon, things began to fall apart for the enterprising scammer. He ran out of money to pay investors, and they began banging on his office doors. When Taylor noticed that things were disintegrating, he fled his office and disabled his website so none of his victims could reach him. He essentially had to go into hiding. When the Dorios learned that they had been scammed, they went back to the church and were told that they should never have invested with him, like they didn't already know that. The same message was given to other members of other churches who told their pastors about how Taylor scammed them as well. There was no help from the churches, and the victims had to sit with the reality that they had lost their money for life. Taylor could run, but he was very bad at hiding. After about a year, he and his wife would be tracked down to their hiding spot. His wife had given up on her music and now rented a massage room at a massage parlor called Panacea Massage. The workers at the parlor became suspicious of Mrs. Taylor, who called herself Liz Taylor, when they overheard conversations between her and her husband being concerned about cameras in the shop. There was also constant discussion between the pair about the fortune they'd lost. So the co-workers Googled her and discovered that her husband was a huge fraud and on the run from the police. They eventually got in contact with one of those gotcha news shows called The Lookout, who then later told the police. In the end, Ephraim Taylor was arrested and was made to face the law. He was sentenced to 19 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution of about $15 million. When are these guys going to learn? Ponzi's never work. Don't do them. What happens when family members run a scam together? Let's get right into it. Number 4, campaign madness. Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter and his wife Margaret Hunter mishandled more than $250,000 that they received in campaign funds, putting it towards personal expenses and forging false campaign finance records. Duncan Hunter was exposed to the political sphere very young when his father was a member of Congress for 14 terms. In 2007, Duncan Lee Hunter, Duncan's father, announced that as part of his presidential bid, he would not seek re-election to the House of Representatives and retired from Congress. Hunter announced his candidacy for his father's seat, and in 2008 won the Republican primary with 72% of the vote. He later defeated the Democratic nominee Mike Lumpkin and became the first combat veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan to serve in the U.S. Congress. The couple used campaign funds for many things, including video games, private school tuition, and oral surgery, despite spending campaign funds for personal use being banned by the law. They used the funds for European vacations, ski trips, and hotel stays. Their lives might have seemed glamorous and lavish to outsiders, but the couple was dealing with serious financial struggles. Although Hunter received an annual salary of $174,000 and Margaret was paid $3,000 a month as his campaign manager, their bank accounts overdrew more than 1,100 times over 7 years, and the bank charged them $37,761 in overdraft and insufficient fund fees. After receiving a shutoff notice, they had to use the campaign credit card for groceries and use donations to pay their water bill. Financial pressure led to the family selling their home and moving in with Hunter's father. The couple disguised their transactions as campaign-related, like creating official government business at sites they were visiting on vacation. The Federal Election Commission, FEC, and the San Diego Union Tribune began questioning campaign expenses in April 2016. Hunter asserted his innocence countless times, refusing to admit his guilt or resign his seat when the charges were released to the public. One of Hunter's attorneys, Gregory A. Vega, attacked the prosecutor's credibility with the U.S. Attorney's Office and wanted them recused. He claimed that 2 of the prosecutors attended a 2015 fundraiser for Democrat Hillary Clinton, which would make them biased against Hunter. Amongst the suspicious purchases that Hunter made to his campaign was a vacation to Italy, which he told his campaign treasurer was military defense related. Later, in an email, Margaret Hunter told a friend how great the family trip had been. Hunter fought allegations of wrongdoing by making his chief of staff deny that the trip was a family vacation to the press. In 2016, the Office of Congressional Ethics recommended that the Ethics Committee perform a full investigation on the couple. In February 2017, the FBI raided Hunter's campaign offices. Agents seized computers and hard drives, and Hunter was soon under a Department of Justice criminal investigation. Investigators uncovered the scope of the couple's fraudulent spending, which began in 2010 when Hunter started reimbursing his campaign account after Margaret Hunter purchased 12 tickets to see How the Grinch Stole Christmas at the Globe Theater. The couple used campaign campaign funds from 2010 to late 2016, reporting all of their expenses as campaign-related to the campaign treasurer. Hunter alleged that one of his many campaign-related trips was a vacation to Las Vegas. A friend that went on the trip described a very different vacation, where they lounged by the pool, went sightseeing, ate out at several restaurants, and went to a show. Hunter attempted to conceal his illegal spending on that trip by scheduling a 20-minute tour of a nearby charter school. When the family's bank account balance was negative, the Hunters put campaign funds towards a date night and a couple's day out at Del Mar Racetrack. They also used funds to celebrate their child's birthday. Again, Hunter justified these expenses as campaign-related to the treasurer. By November 2017, Hunter had repaid over $60,000 to his campaign for what he claimed were mistaken or insufficiently documented expenditures. The couple was indicted in 2018 and charged with unlawfully spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. The pair entered the courtroom separately and had separate legal teams, and they both pleaded not guilty. In June 2019, Hunter pleaded guilty to one count of misusing campaign funds, and Margaret Hunter pleaded guilty to one count of corruption. Court documents showed they spent on small things like movie tickets, groceries, and utilities. They also made elaborate purchases like trips to luxury hotels and even plane tickets for their family rabbits. Margaret acknowledged that she secretly funded thousands of dollars in improper personal purchases using Hunter's campaign funds. Hunter blamed his wife for the crimes, as she was the campaign manager and in charge of finances. He claimed that the $1,000 in video game purchases that investigators uncovered were purchases made by his son. He alleged that the prosecution targeted him as he was one of the earliest supporters of Donald Trump's campaign. U.S. Attorney Mark Conover commended Margaret for her cooperation with investigators, contributing to her sentence of 8 months in home confinement, which began in August 2020. Hunter's attorneys also sought home confinement, but he was sentenced to 11 months federal prison. The House Ethics Committee told Hunter he had to refrain from voting because he pleaded guilty to a federal felony. Later that year, in December, he announced his resignation from Congress. Hunter was supposed to report to prison in La Tuna, Texas in January 2021, but former President Trump pardoned Hunter and Margaret Hunter in December 2020. Number 3, 12 years to scam. Husband and wife, Philip and Laura Borrell, along with Laura's mother, Frances Noble, conspired to commit fraud when they convinced Hertfordshire County Council in England that Frances had a brain disorder. The three family members swindled £734,000 from the council as part of a direct payments care package. The scam lasted from August 1st, 2005 to November 30, 2018. Hertfordshire County Council offers care packages to people that are assessed as needing help and want to arrange their care. The council gave the trio access to a direct payments care package to support Frances, who claimed to be unable to feed herself and bedbound, meaning that she needed daily care. The trio put together forged emails on behalf of caregivers Frances hired to look after her at her home. Over 13 years, Frances received £624,047 from the council. Philip and Laura Borrell took their fraud further when they appeared on the popular British show This Morning. Laura announced on national television that she had dementia. She said that it began when she started to mix her words. She spoke about being dismissed by doctors, describing a neurologist as vile after they didn't believe her. Philip added that she would have episodes where she would struggle with her language or speak incoherently. He also said that she would get confused, especially in the evening. When asked about her prognosis, she said it was too difficult to tell due to her age. The hosts announced that the couple was raising money to spread awareness for the disease and travel so that the pair could enjoy the time they had left together. People became suspicious of the couple's announcement of their diagnosis, including neighbors that noticed the Amazon truck delivering many packages to the Borrells' house. They grew increasingly curious about Philip's job since Laura couldn't work. Neighbors were baffled when the couple purchased a brand new Volvo. They also went on lavish vacations, going to places like Boston, San Francisco, and Canada between 2011 and 2017. Frances raised suspicions in her neighborhood when they saw her walking her dog and unpacking a supermarket food delivery without any signs of physical strain. She claimed that she couldn't leave the house nor do any physical activity. Carers believe that Frances was exaggerating the extent of her needs and reported it to Hertfordshire County Council, who began a fraud investigation. Frances moved to Germany in 2019 when the police opened up an investigation against her, and a few months later, she was joined by Laura and Philip. In June 2020, the three family members pleaded not guilty at St. Albans Crown Court. They changed their pleas to guilty in 2019. 2022. The Burrells returned to the UK to appear before the court, but Frances stayed in Berlin and denied any wrongdoing. She said they were running out of money to fight the case, which was the only reason they changed their pleas from not guilty to guilty. Frances was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months in jail by St. Albans Court for defrauding Hertfordshire County Council. The judge sentenced Laura Burrell to 3 years and 9 months and Philip Burrell to 4 years and 3 months. Both were charged with money laundering offenses related to fraud. Their crime was one of the largest frauds of its type to be brought to English courts. Number 2. Advertising scams. The owners of Smith Advertising stole $63 million from their 100 victims due to a fraud scheme they conducted from 2008 to 2012. Gary Truman Smith and his son, Gary Todd Smith, ran Smith Advertising, a North Carolina-based company that also had a presence in Florida. Their investors lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some were forced to declare bankruptcy. Smith Advertising began as a legitimate business that did advertising work, but in the mid-2000s, it struggled to stay afloat. Things only got worse when the 2008 financial crisis hit. Other companies might have filed for bankruptcy or restructured their business model, but the father and son were too money-hungry to do either. They solicited investors when the business began to struggle, reaching out to friends, people in their community, churchgoers, and other organizations. The terms of the loans were that investors would give the company money to pre-purchase advertising at a discount, and Smith Advertising would repay them the amount of the loan and give them a cut of the discount. Truman Smith and Todd Smith advertised bridge loans to everyone they knew. A bridge loan is a short-term loan to cover an interval between two transactions and is most commonly used for buying one house and selling another. The company wasn't buying advertising like they told investors. They used the loans to repay old debts and keep the company afloat. Some victims received their promised return from the company, but that money came from another victim's investment. Smith Advertising engaged in factoring, an industry term for companies selling off the money they're owed from one company because they need cash faster. The Smiths didn't have any money coming in. They printed fake invoices and ripped off investors, buying debts owed to them. They pretended that it was factoring, but in reality, they were lying to investors. Gary Todd Smith, the son, enjoyed his expensive lifestyle too much to let their scheme fail. He inherited the company from his father, and the pair let out their lavish lifestyles while the business secretly faltered. Todd Smith's love for his lifestyle and pride stopped him from ever declaring bankruptcy, and he wanted to get out of trouble by himself. The debt the company accumulated eventually destroyed them, and at one point, their bank balance was minus $12 million. The Secret Service and FBI were notified that the company's checks were bouncing. Investigators quickly found that the company had performed fraudulent activities. The evidence included 2 sets of company books, one that was legitimate and the other that documented their scheme, which showed how to falsify documents. Smith Advertising was sued by Sarasota's Receivable Management Funding LLC, or RMF, who alleged that the father and son convinced RMF, an investment group, to provide more than $17 million to the company. RMF accused them of fraud and misrepresentation. The suit claimed that Todd Smith faked invoices from clients claiming to owe the firm money. RMF was supposed to collect that money to repay revolving credit loans and give investors 20% or more. Smith Advertising told RMF that one of their clients, Charlotte County Visitors Bureau, owed $900,000. RMF's administrative manager, Michael Schultz, reached out to the Bureau as a Smith secured creditor. Laura Steiner, the Bureau's director, said their annual advertising budget was $255,000. Schultz told her that the Visitors Bureau had an outstanding balance of $900,000 and that he needed to collect it. Steiner wanted to know who did the due diligence on the supposed debt, to which Schultz sent her a stack of invoices. She maintained that someone forged her signature on at least one of the invoices. Smith Advertising collapsed in 2012 with a net worth of negative $169.8 million. The Smiths had 3 accomplices that worked for Smith Advertising and helped perpetrate the scheme. They pleaded guilty 2016 to conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud and agreed to help prosecutors. Gary Truman Smith pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud charges and received a 5-year sentence in January 2019. His son, Gary Todd Smith, pleaded guilty to wire fraud and mail fraud charges in 2017. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The judge ordered Todd Smith to pay his victims $63.5 million in restitution, but his bankruptcy makes it unlikely that he'll ever be able to pay them back. Their victims suffered financial devastation due to the Smiths' fraud scheme and dealt with bankruptcies and losing their homes, retirement funds, and children's education funds. Number 1. Like father, like daughter. Businessman Mac Hosendile Luckhope and his daughter Naledi were charged with fraud, forgery, and uttering under the company names Emabongwe Building, Civil Contractors CC, and Tsunami Civils. Together, they defrauded the Eastern Cape Education Department of 4 million South African rand, around $218,000. And yep, uttering is a real charge in South Africa. The charge of uttering is for a crime where someone intends to defraud knowingly by selling, publishing, or passing on a forged document. You know, basically scamming. They ran separate companies and submitted fraudulent lease agreements for their offices in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, leading to them being awarded funding meant for aspiring local entrepreneurs. Luckhope allegedly submitted an unlawful lease contract that misrepresented that Emabongwe Building was operational in the Eastern Cape and had a business in the province. The Provincial Education Department awarded 1.9 million South African rand, roughly $103,497. Naledi was the sole director of Tsunami Civils, and like her father, was awarded money from the Education Department in the Eastern Cape when she claimed her business there. She advertised herself on Instagram as an entrepreneur and sold clothes through social media. She caused a stir in South African tabloids when social media users thought she was used as a front by her dad being too young to pull off the scheme alone. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather do. Invest your own money yourself or hire a professional.